Welcome back to another MVM review. Today we have Underwater Cities. This is from Vladimir Suchi and Delicious Games. It is a 1 to 4 player worker placement game with a little bit of route building as well.
Yeah, for sure. You're going to be doing worker placement for the most part, but then in front of you, you have a player board where you're going to be building underwater cities. And building things around those cities, and both really dynamically play off one another.
So the idea behind the game is that terraforming Mars, no pun intended, is years and years away. So human civilization now has to expand, and the only place to expand is under the water. So the game revolves really around the worker placement spots and the cards in the game. If you are familiar with Terraforming Mars, I think you're going to be familiar with this game because there's a lot of cards. You're going to be using those cards to build vast engines in front of you to power your civilization. Your civilization is your actual player board. On your player board, you're going to have spaces to build 2 types of domes, which are kind of the cities within the game. You have symbiotic and non-symbiotic, and really the only difference between them is the color of the dome. And then the symbiotic ones are going to give you victory points at the production phases at the end of the game, and they cost some very, very rare resources. So when you look at this, you're going to see a place for 9 domes, a lot of places for tunnels, and then little round spots around them where you're going to be building 3 types of structures or buildings. These buildings consist of farms, they consist of laboratories, and desalination plants that all are going to give you different types of resources, which are your biomass and your plasteel and all those different things that you're going to be using round after round to build. Also on your player board, you're going to have a place for 3 metropolises actually, but 1 super metropolis in the upper left-hand corner, and then 2 other blue ones that you're trying to connect to, because to get production in this game, you have to connect everything together through tunnels.
Yeah, you're going to start with 1 dome in the lower right-hand corner of your board, but everything has to be connected to that in order to score it or produce it during the production phase. And then, like Jeremy said, those metropolises or metropoli, once you're connected to those via tunnels, a couple of them are going to give you usually some instant one-time bonuses or maybe something during production. And then the super metropolis is typically an end-of-game scoring mechanism.
There's a lot of stuff that we could talk about in this game. And what we're going to do is give you just a brief overview of what you're trying to do and then get right into our review, because there's a lot of things we want to talk about in the review. So what are you trying to do? The game is powered by the cards. You're going to see a huge number of cards. In fact, there's over 200 different cards. They share some artwork, they share some titles of some of them, but however, the tops, the abilities of these cards are all different.
Yeah, that's an insane amount of cards to use, and you're going to be using these in conjunction with the spaces on the board. You're not playing the cards to those spaces, but you're going to be using a card and a space, hopefully both, on your turn.
Yeah, the whole game revolves around these 15 spaces that you see around the outside. They're all color-coded, and they refer to the 3 different colored cards in the game. So there's green cards, there's red cards, and then there's yellow cards, along with the 15 spots. The trick is, on your turn, you're going to have a hand of 3 cards at the start of your turn. And what you have to do is use that card to power one of the worker placement spots. You can always use the worker placement spot, no matter what card that you use, as long as it's not blocked by another player. So only 1 player can occupy any of these spots. However, this is the rub in the game and one of the great things about the game. If you have a card that matches the color of the spot you get to, not only do you get to do the worker placement spot, but you also get to do that card.
Yeah, it's about efficiencies for sure. You want to try to utilize both the card and the spot as often as humanly possible. Now, there are going to be times when you don't want to do that because you're very focused on a very specific thing that you're wanting to do in your underwater sort of network right here. And there are going to be spots that someone else may have taken earlier in the round, so you really need to be able to be flexible and be okay with sometimes just using the location.
Outside of these 15 worker placement spots, there's also 2 other spots in a 3 and 4 player game. You're going to notice this location here. In the 4 player game, you have the ability of copying one of the actions that someone else has done. So if someone has occupied one of the spots that you need to go to gather resources or to build bridges or to enact certain actions on the board, you can actually use this tile in conjunction with the space that someone else has used. Also, at any given time, say I didn't want to use any of the spots and I needed some money and I needed some more cards in my hand, you can get rid of a card and use this spot here. Any amount of people can go to this location. And it allows you to get 2 new cards and $2 back into your hand to be able to fuel some of your further actions in the game.
Yeah, that is one of those spots I would say that is sort of the last resort, typically. You are going to want to cycle some cards at times because you really want to get some cards in your hands that synergize with the other things you've got going on. Like Jeremy said, you're also going to get $2 for that. to copy someone else's space, you have to pay $1 or 1 credit to do that.
All right, so the cards themselves, as we said, are kind of the fuel within the game. This is what you're going to be using a lot of. They have 5 different types of things. Along with what's across the top of each of these cards, if you look at the anatomy of a card, you're going to notice a picture in the center, the name of the card, and across the top is the action that the card provides. In this case, this is a red card, meaning that I can only take this action if I use it with a red space. What the card does, though, depends on the upper left-hand corner. There's 5 different types. There's ones that take place instantly, the moment that you play them, and they're going to go directly to the discard pile once they give you the ability. There's permanents that are going to stay out on your side and always give you an ongoing ability, like an engine that you're building through the course of the game. There's ones that are production ones that are going to give you something at the 4th, 7th, and 10th round. At the end of each of those rounds, they're going to allow you to produce something within the game. You also have 2 other types of cards. You have action cards and the end of the game cards. There's certain spots on each of these locations that have the A symbol. You can do actions by using those specific spots in the game. Each of these actions, once they're used until the production phase. So you have to decide when you want to use them, and you have to power them with these different abilities. Again, these are cards that are going to stay off to the left-hand side, and you can use them when you power them with that action.
Yeah, these are generally slightly more powerful cards than you'd get in your instance and things like that. And in fact, everyone starts with one of these in front of them, which is the personal assistant. As you can see the little A there. So whenever you use one of these, you're just going to tap it, use its ability. But like Jeremy said, you can't just do that. So you're not building up an easy engine where you can tap all your cards. You have to go to one of these spaces. So again, one of those decisions you have to make when you're going out to those spaces, and did someone already go there, and now you're not going to be able to use that card. So you really have to remain flexible.
The last card, they're available in several of the decks, but they're also available here on the board. There's 6 of these cards that are mostly into the game. They're going to stay off to the side of the board when they're played. They cost money when you play them, so they're expensive, and they're a first come, first serve. They're mostly tied into having something on your board at the end of the game and getting those points. You're going to play round after round. A round consists of this. Each player has 3 of these tokens, and on your turn, you're going to play a card on one of these things, take the action, and you're going to cover that up with this tile, meaning that that's blocked. The next player's going to go, and you're going to go around the table 3 times until everyone has used all 3 of their tokens. At the end of the round, everyone's going to collect their tokens back up, and then you're going to do that again. You're going to do that 4 times until you hit the first production cycle. And it's during the production cycle that everything on your board and all the cards that you have produced are going to give you something. And what are you getting from it? Well, tunnels are going to give credits. Your farms are going to give you kelp that you will need to feed your people during the production. You have labs that are going to give you
steel plast, right?
Steel plast, yeah. I mean, there's all the different types of buildings that you're building around your domes are going to give you those resources during the production to fuel your next 2 or 3 turns.
Yeah, these resources are things you're going to be spending on a lot of these actions. And like we said, we didn't go over a lot of these actions, but many of these are going to allow you to expand and build onto your player board with all of those things that we just talked about.
You're also going to have to feed each of your individual domes or your cities as long as they're connected to your network. So if it's connected, it's going to produce those resources for you. If it's not connected, you don't have to pay for the city, but it's also not going to produce for you. You're going to do that at the end of the 4th, at the end of the 7th, and at the end of the 10th round. At the end of the 10th round, you're going to tally up all of your points. Any of the points you've collected through the game, of course, are going to give you in-game points. A lot of the cards that you collected have in-game points associated with what you've done. Your entire network is going to give you points. Depending on all the things that are connected, your tunnels, your symbiotic domes, your different types of buildings that you have. If you have areas that have all 3 types of buildings on them and you've built that through the game, you're going to get more points for those than a city that has just farms on it.
Yeah, and then of course, all of your resources are going to be converted over. Some of the resources are more valuable. You're going to convert all of those things to credits, and then the credits are going to convert to points as well. It's safe to say this game has a lot of points from a lot of different areas, and you can score your points in drastically different ways.
All right, let's talk about our review. First off, David, one of your favorite games last year was Pulsar 2849.
Yep.
And if you don't know Vladimir Suchi, for you guys that aren't board game enthusiasts, this is from the same designer as one of the best games last year that we had played, which was a dice drafting game. This is an engine building tableau worker placement type of game. And it's vastly different than that, but it just shares some of the design space that he used in that game. Just like Pulsar 2849, this game has an immense amount of variability in the game. You have the government contracts, which we didn't even talk about, which can be played with or not played with. These are goals that everybody can achieve. There's a lot of those different cards, and only 3 of them are going to be used. You have a double-sided player board, because on the back side of your player board, you're going to notice a lot of unique locations that are going to give you things, and only you, variable player powers for doing very specific things through the course of the game. You have the worker placement spots. You don't know what cards are going to come up at any given time, and when you count the number of cards, when you have the Era 1, the Era 2, the Era 3 cards, in conjunction with all of these special cards, you have over 200 different cards that you could be looking at every single game.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest similarities that I can think of when I relate this to Pulsar is the things you can do in this game in terms of collecting cards, mostly the cards, but also even some of the stuff, the way you build out your city. It's going to create a very unique engine for you and how you're going to score your points and how you want to sort of take advantage of all of those cards throughout the different phases of the game. Because this game is one where you can score your points along the way. You can score a lot of points in some ways during the production phases. You can do, and you can score a lot of your points at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Just like Pulsar 2849. But like Jeremy said, extraordinarily different game. In fact, I would think if I were going to relate this game to other games, like you said, Terraforming Mars, it's like Terraforming Mars if built around a worker placement mechanic at its core, for sure.
Speaking of the worker placement spot, I love the worker placement in this game. Number one, the spots are awesome. It's a very strict game. And what I mean by that, the more players you have, the game condenses down. You wouldn't think how important a simple location that gives you science is. But once that's taken, you're scrambling to figure out how you're going to be able to increase the locations that you have. I love the matching of the cards to the spots. That's really, really unique. So I love that whole card play system in the game.
Yeah, it's really cool. And like we said, that one space where you can trade in one card for a couple new cards and credits, that's going to be a space you want to go to. If you find yourself with a handful of cards and you can't really go and synergize with the green and the red, you're going to want to potentially do something like that. But on the other hand, like I said, there is going to be some times where a handful of one-color cards could be really beneficial for your engine right at that moment.
One of the other very cool things that we skipped on was the first player. How do you become first player in the game? There's this Federation track down here. There is no spot in this game where you can just be the first player, but there's several spots and several cards that allow you to move up this Federation track to get bonuses when you move up it. But also, it's a fight during the round to be the first player, not by a single spot, but by the actions that you take in the game. It's really unique.
Yeah, and one of the coolest things, this is just a side note on this Federation track, there are some cards that will trigger with an instant if you're in a very specific spot at that moment on the Federation track, which I've never seen anything like that. But when you get one of those cards in your hand, I defy you not to want to say, okay, next thing I'm going to do is get to that 3 spot so I can play this card and take advantage of it.
The last positive I'll say is the artwork in the game. I love the artwork. Even though there's not unique art pieces for every single card, I mean, you see right here on the main board itself, it's very, very well done. And then the iconography in this game is brilliant. Like, it's super simple. We played one round of this game, and there was really no one referencing the rulebook after that, because not only is the iconography good, but most of these cards are going to write right on the bottom of what the card does as well. So if you look at it and you're like, I'm not quite sure, oh, it's right here on the card.
Yeah, it's honestly one of those games where you don't even have to reference the rulebook. As long as you have a handful of cards, everyone can kind of look at their cards and realize what even some of the other iconography must mean if you're having trouble with it.
Yeah. You have any more positives? Because I'm done with my positives.
No, I would say all of my positives are those same things. Very much like Pulsar in terms of all the decisions that you're making in this game. That's probably the more general pro for this game is there's a ton of decision makings. Now, I will segue that into my first con.
Yeah.
It can be, just like Pulsar, potentially a little overwhelming for the casual player. In fact, more so. This is a medium to heavy or heavy to medium maybe game. And for new time players, all those icons, as great as they are, there are a ton of different icons in this game. So you do have to get to know those. It is easy to learn them if you're a dedicated gamer, but it can be a little overwhelming for sure because there's a lot going on in this game.
Yeah, I would agree. The AP in this game can be a little bit overwhelming, although you only have 3 cards in your hand at the start of your turn. So as the game starts to fill up, you start to recognize locations like, well, I can't go here, and if I do, I just get the spot itself. So you start to break that down the further the round gets. 2 more cons I have. Number 1, the quality of most of the components is really good. However, the player board and this player aid, they are as flimsy as you can be. I'm not sure why they didn't use cardboard in this instance, but they're just almost like thin paper. And the other thing is, I think this game plays best at 3 and 4 players. We haven't played a 2-player game, so I can't 100% comment on that, but I think the joy in this game is having that hand cards, as I just mentioned, and then those places locking down, because in this game, a lot of these worker placement spots do not repeat the action. Almost all of them don't repeat the action. So if you want to build, for instance, labs, this is the only place to build labs, and you got to go there if you want to go there first, or copy them. But once those 2 things are done, you're going to be waiting until the next round to build labs, and I love that part, and I think that serves itself best in a larger player game.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to bounce back to my pros, but on that point, there are some cards that will allow you to do that too, which when they come up are very savory. You know, you see that card and you're like, I played one at the end of one of our games where someone had taken this spot. That's the spot that I needed to take on my last turn, and I was able to do that. And I'd say one other con for me, and Jeremy already touched on this, is that AP aspect. Because it's worker placement specifically, especially as it relates to comparing it to Pulsar, you could be thinking of your turn, and then the spot gets taken. And then if you're already AP, which I am at times, then you have to start from ground one. You know, someone to your right takes, or the person right in front of you takes your spot. What are you going to do? You have to kind of think about a million different things. Now, on the flip side, again, back to my pro, all the decision making, that same thing happens in Pulsar. In fact, there's a couple of games of this where we played and someone came around to them and they're like, I forgot what I was going to do. It's because between you and your next turn, you're thinking of all these different things you can do, and that's really one of the glorious things about the game.
If you guys are fans of Terraforming Mars, this is a no-brainer. I think it pushes those same buttons, although it's a very different game. That card play, that engine building, that worker placement, if you like traditional worker placement Euro-style games, I think you're going to love this game. This is definitely an MVM-approved title. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.